Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, and my daughter and co-host Heidi is on a plane today, so I'm going to be flying alone on this show, but I have got a fabulous show today with a great friend of mine, Zander Sprague. Hi, Zander.
Hi, how are you, Gloria?
Good. I'm so happy you're on today. You're such an inspiration to everybody, and I want to tell people a little bit about you to start out with. Zander Sprague is the go-to speaker and author for Sibling Loss. His mission is to help siblings, survivors, define their loss and choose a positive pathway. He is an internationally acclaimed book called Making Lemonade, Choosing a Positive Pathway After Losing Your Sibling. And he's helped hundreds of people, probably thousands by now, around the world. And he also hosts a podcast called The Lemonade Stand, which we'll be talking about later, that is for and about sibling loss. Zander, thank you so much for being on.
Thanks so much for having me on, Gloria.
Now, we were talking about the topic today because this is really an important topic. And Zander's sister was murdered, and we'll be talking to him a bit about that. But I want to focus on his pathway through to hope. So we'll briefly talk a bit about the murder of his sister. But our topic is murder. Can you choose a positive pathway? And this show could be called How You Can Choose a Positive Pathway, because Zander's done it through great adversity, and he's got so much great advice to give you. Because if you take probably one of the most heinous things that can happen to your life, and Zander is such a wonderful example of he can get through something this horrible and find a positive pathway. So we're going to give you some great tips today, and we hope you'll tell your friends and family about the show. So Zander, talk a little bit about your sister.
Well, my sister Lucy was 30 years old. She was a second-year law student at John Marshall Law School in Chicago. And on December 9th, 1996, she was in her apartment, and a maintenance worker in the building had gotten access to some passkeys and let himself in, we think, to do just a petty theft. And they surprised each other. He ended up strangling my sister and jumping out her fourth floor window onto a second floor roof where he broke his ankle. The police had him right away, so there was never any question of who did this. And then 10 days after that, he hung himself in the Cook County prison.
Oh, wow.
So, you know, I think I view that as, I guess, a good thing in the sense that my family didn't have to go through what would have been a very public and very personally painful trial.
Mm-hmm. But your dad was a judge, right?
Yeah, my dad was a district court judge in Massachusetts at the time. So, you know,
so it's got to have been pretty high profile. The whole thing must have been.
It was it was very high profile, and had this gone to trial, we feel most likely it would have been on court TV, gotten a lot more press, and that would have made it a lot more challenging for the whole process.
So this has been 22 years for you, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And you have had an incredible trip. So how old were you at the time?
I was 28 at the time.
Okay. Were you married?
I was not married at the time. I did have a girlfriend who was very supportive through that, because she also was close to Lucy. She'd been my girlfriend for many years, close to the, you know, that's the way that those things work. And, you know, but very, again, you know, Gloria, there were things I thought I would deal with in my life, and murder really was not one of those things.
Right. Well, tell me, what had you been through before that? Anything that built those grief muscles a little bit?
Well, I mean, I'd lost, you know, grandparents. I had some friends of mine who had actually lost siblings that I knew, and so some of some of that, and it hindsight's wonderfully clear when you look back and say, look at this path that I'm on now with helping other sibling survivors, and I knew people who had also lost siblings,
Mm-hmm.
and so that was, I think that's where it was helpful. Those grief muscles had a little work, not nearly.
Right. You're just beginning with the 1 pound
Exactly.
weights, right?
Exactly.
And then suddenly you get 50-pound weights.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I say to people that phone call from my dad was, I just remember going numb from the top of my head down, and I literally just didn't know how to process what he was telling me,
Mm-hmm.
because I just didn't. I I just never imagined that my family would have to deal with someone being murdered, and perhaps that's naive on my part, but my sister had lived in a nice apartment in a nice part of Chicago. There was a doorman. It was supposed to be as safe as a building could be.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that 10 days they had him, the 10 days, I wondered how that, uh, how that was, and how did you deal when you heard he killed himself? It's so interesting because particularly where people are capital punishment, they wait for years and years, and then when the person finally gets executed, or when the person finally gets their jail sentence after a long-term situation in court. And I know I'm asking you this question because I know you know the answers because you are a counselor. So it's hard, that waiting period. So you had that 10 days where you knew who it was, but some people don't have any resolution. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, they don't. I mean, I went the day after Lucy was murdered. My dad and I flew to Chicago. We had to talk to the police. We had to go to her apartment and get her essential documents: passport, license, social security card, just stuff
Right.
that we needed. And then we had to.
And the police had to get in there and try to figure it out. It's a crime scene.
Right. I mean, they'd actually already gone in and done their work. The forensic team was already done. But one of my questions in talking to one of the assistant state's attorney, which is like what they call their DA, um, was whether we were going to have any kind of an issue. This being 1996 and right after, very close to the whole OJ trial.
Mm,
The man who killed my sister was African American. I'm obviously Caucasian, so was my sister. Were we in Cook County, which is 60% African American, were we going to have an issue with race?
mhm,
And they said no, they didn't feel that there was any kind of a problem there. This was, a very straightforward kind of a case. But I know from my dad being a judge that
mm. There is no such thing as a
there's no
straightforward
such
case.
thing. And you know, uh, things that I thought about in those 10 days were, what if um, what if he doesn't have proper counsel?
Mhm,
What if on appeal it turns out that something didn't happen? What if people didn't do their job?
mhm.
What if the jury just says, we don't feel that there's enough to convict him?
Yeah.
Then,
Well, let's talk about what that is, what you're telling me, because it sounds like you're in shock and trying to take control.
yeah, somewhat. I mean, I'm trying to figure out whether what I wanna,
Yeah.
I
Trying to
whether
find some
justice.
sanity.
Yeah, and looking to say, do we have a good chance of justice here, right?
Mhm.
My sister didn't do anything.
Right.
and yet she's dead, and we know who did it.
Right.
And is the fact that my dad is a judge, is that a positive or a negative?
Right.
And I, I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, now talk to me about being a sibling. Did most people want to know how your parents were, or how did it go?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, in that first week, I totally get it. I mean, some people asked how I was, but I was really in honestly, I was in a fog.
Now,
But
are there just two of you, you and your sister?
I have a younger sister,
Okay.
and she was living in Florida at the time. She obviously came up to Boston, where I was living and where my parents lived, and
So you're
uh,
there though. So yeah, you're
yeah,
right with your parents. So yeah.
I was, after my dad called, I lived 7 miles away. I drove in and I was there for my parents, and as I'm driving in, I'm thinking this is the worst possible thing that could happen to any parent. And I really didn't give my parents nearly enough credit for their own strength, because I figured they would be catatonic in the corner and I was going to have to take care of everything, and I was trying to figure out what everything was.
Mhm.
Luckily, my parents are a lot stronger than I gave them credit for.
And they probably had some grief muscles that they developed over the many years.
Yes, I would say so. And but again, this wasn't anything that
Right.
anyone in our family had ever dealt with. So it's sort of a whole new. Oh,
Okay, so fast forward to
mhm.
when did you have any turning point where you felt like that life was going to be okay again?
Yeah, I actually have I have a freakishly good memory for dates, times, and places. And I remember I was driving on the Massachusetts Turnpike in Brighton, and I had this sort of revelation that even though I had all of these friends that were there supporting me, that I alone was going to have to figure out how to work my way through this. I also had a moment in my apartment where I let
What
go.
year was it that you were on the turnpike and said, "I got it"?
Oh, that was in January of 1997. She was murdered in December of 1996. So
Okay.
probably like 2 months after, about
Okay.
the end of January, I was driving and just sort of had this moment where I was like, I'm going to have to figure this out. It's great that all these people are there to help me, but
Hmm.
I mean, I'm going to use, because I'm, you know, endurance athlete. I'll use a marathon metaphor here and say, you know, I got to run Boston Marathon in 2014, which was fabulous, and I ran in memory of all of the siblings,
Ah,
um, for the people who died and who were injured, and for Lucy,
after that bomb blast
and
there.
after
Yeah.
that bomb blast. But um, I, I had to run that 26.2 miles. No
Uh-huh.
matter how much support I had, I was the one who was actually having to go out and physically do that. And I think our grief journeys, we have to do that work ourselves. It's great that
Right.
we have all that support. It's great, all the people who are cheering me, but I'm the one who has to do this work.
Hmm. And
Um,
tell me what the work is.
I think I think one of the first things that I realized was I needed to let go of trying to figure out why this
Hmm.
happened,
Hmm.
because I could spend the rest of my life trying to look for that answer, and I will never have that answer.
Or what could have been done differently? Why
Absolutely,
and how could history have changed?
absolutely. And I think I freed myself by saying, I won't know. And even though it bothers me, I can't be stuck there, because I was really bumping up against that wall of why did this happen? It's not fair. What could have been different? You know, what if she hadn't been in her apartment? Because
Hmm.
normally, actually, Lucy wouldn't have been in her apartment. She would have been down at law school. It's just that it was exam period, and she didn't have an exam that morning, so she just
Hmm.
happened to be in her apartment. But getting stuck on all of that, it
Hmm.
just doesn't
How long would you say it took you to get out of, to break that wall down and stop putting that wall up of whys?
I'd say probably about 9 months or so. I mean, I was sort of noodling on it, but then I sort of had to just let that go. I mean, about 6 months after Lucy was killed, uh, I started some personal therapy because I felt like I was doing okay, but I just wanted to make sure, from a professional that I was actually okay, because I didn't want to sort of, sometimes I think we can fool ourselves into believing that we're okay, and in fact we're not. We're doing things that are sabotaging ourselves. And I wasn't drinking a lot, I wasn't eating too much, I wasn't doing things that were um,
Self-harming?
self-harming in some way.
Yeah.
I don't want to make
Those
a
are subtle self-harms.
they are, but it's still important. I mean, I think you had alluded to people not asking about me, and in the months that followed, as I was in Boston, people come up and ask how my parents were, but no one asked how I was. And I
Hmm.
started to have moments where I was starting to believe that my grief and my loss was not as significant as my parents. And then I came to the conclusion, and I tell this to all my sibling survivors, that our our loss is just as important. It's different, and I'm not going to in any way equate it to the same as losing a child. But it
But you
is
can only know your own loss. I mean, sometimes people get upset because, say, a grandparent died, and then they are talking to a bereaved parent, and they say, "Well, I know how it feels to lose a child because my grandmother died," or something. You can
yeah,
only know your own loss, and then people have got to cut you some slack because if it was just my grandma, I don't know. I don't know. If I
yeah,
lost my dog, people get mad because people say they lost the dog. Well, you know what? For some people, that's a family member. I mean, you can only know your own loss.
absolutely, absolutely. And
So you're helping a lot of siblings because I want to get to everything you're doing because you're an amazing guy.
thank you.
And you're finishing your hours, your psychology hours to Palo Alto School of Psychology. Is that where you're
I
going?
actually I graduated from Palo Alto University with my
Hmm.
master's, and I'm working on my hours for my professional clinical counseling license.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
right now I'm doing intern hours in the Castro Valley Unified School District at the high school and in the middle school.
And that's where he is today. And what a lucky group of people they are to have you there. Are you working with some people who've had siblings die there?
I not so far this year, no, but I actually just had a client this morning whose father passed away about 2 weeks ago.
All right,
So
give us your number one piece of advice that you gave that person.
um, I told him that it would come in, that the grief comes in waves, and sometimes it's overwhelming. However, to just remember to breathe.
Mhm.
That,
I love it. Simple
that
as that. Breathe and drink some water, right?
absolutely. I mean, I remember after Lucy died, um, for some reason I ended up watching Sleepless in Seattle, but I remember this line that Tom Hanks has where he's asked how he's doing, and he says, "Well, I'm breathing in and I'm breathing out, and pretty soon I won't have to think about that." And that really resonated with me, because I'm like, yeah, that's exactly where I am,
Right. Okay, tell us how people find you. Your wonderful book. His book is great, Making Lemonade, Choosing a Positive Pathway After Losing Your Sibling. And you can see this guy has done it. And how do they get your book?
They can go to zandersprague.com, and or you can also go to makinglemonadebook.com to buy the book. If you want to hear more from me about sibling loss, I have a podcast called The Lemonade Stand that's available at thezanderzone.com, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify. Not
Now,
hard
what's
to.
your website?
Well, I've got zandersprague.com is my main website,
Okay.
and you can link to everything from there.
Okay. and wonderful guy. And he oftentimes presents at the Compassionate Friends, which will have a national conference next July. You can go on the compassionatefriends.org to find it. And they sponsor these shows with us. So that's one of the ways we know Zander. And we hope that that's the organization for people who have lost children, grandchildren, and siblings. So join up, and friends can come too, of course. So Zander, thank you so much for being who you are and for inspiring us and for showing how that people can actually choose a pathway. And we've seen people who don't choose the pathway, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a choice.
It is a choice every day.
Yeah, and it's work. I mean, it's building those grief muscles, but it's a wonderful journey because how would Heidi and I ever know Zander if we hadn't been on this journey with him? And so many fabulous people you meet on this journey, and we love you and thank you so much for being on the show, Zander.
Thank you so much, Gloria.
Have a great day. And we want to thank everybody for watching this show. And we hope that you'll tell your friends and family about opentohope.com. And I always want to remind you, I know Zander does, and if Heidi were here, she would, to lean on our hope if you lost hope until you find your own. And God bless.